Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Duke, and welcome again to Right Makes Might. Really grateful for all the wonderful response we had to our Orlando Part 1 show we did last week, where we laid out in very convincing fashion how the government of the United States is lying to us. They are willfully covering up the nature of Islamic terrorism in this country. They are papering it over. And since last week when we had that show, it's even more shocking. Attorney General Loretta Lynch recently released the transcript of the 911 calls, of all the information the authorities have on the Orlando shooting. And what's really shocking about it is that the federal government went through and blocked out every single reference to Islamic terrorism, to Allah, to Muslims in general, to to ISIS. All that was blocked out. And when you listen to the transcript of that, it's one big gap after. So much has been deleted out that you have to piece together meaning because it doesn't make any sense. Now, of course, under pressure from conservatives, Republicans in the legislature, and just general outrage of the American people, that decision has now been reversed. We can now see just how absolutely dedicated Mateen, the murderer, the terrorist murderer who killed those poor people in Orlando, we can see just how affiliated he was to Islamic terrorism. Last week we gave you all sorts of other examples of how your government is complicit in covering up the nature of Islamic terrorism in this country. Your president is quick to point out how guns or the Confederate flag or white privilege is responsible for killings here and there and across the country. No shortage of calling out Christian arrogance. Remember, Obama said you Christians need to get off your high horse when it comes to Islamic terrorism because of the Crusades. Let's go back 1,000 years. So we have definitive evidence now that the Obama administration is not just covering up, but they are complicit in hiding, minimizing, trivializing, and altogether whitewashing the nature of Islamic terrorism in this country. And you may also recall that in his formal speech on the Orlando tragedy, Obama said, quote, "We have no definitive assessment of the motivation," unquote, of Omar Mateen. Well, we know that's now bunk, but, quote, "We do know that this was a person filled with hate." Okay, Mr. Obama, what kind of hate was he filled with? Clearly this wasn't white privilege hate. Clearly this wasn't Confederacy hate. You had no problem calling out those kinds of hate. You went 1,000 years back to the Crusades. This wasn't the hate of Richard the Lionheart. This was the hate of one man with very specific ties to very specific Muslim terrorist organizations who, as he walked about this gay nightclub killing people, was very bold about why he killed them. Obama went on further to say that, quote, "We need the strength and courage to change our attitudes towards the gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community." Mr. President, the attitudes are changed. However much Christians may in theory, Orthodox Jewish people may in theory, right? Right-minded conservatives may disagree with homosexual activism, with gay marriage. No one's going around killing them. They are not being systematically murdered in the name of the Christian God or Republican principles or even the NRA, Mr. President, who you blame for all of this. And that gets us to this absurdity with guns. You spend more time, Mr. President, liberals in general, spend more time railing about guns. This is the fault of guns. It's amazing how they will not name Islamic terrorism, but they will go out of their way to humanize guns as if guns are walking off shelves, hopping out of lockers, and randomly killing people, not being used by suicidal terroristic maniacs. Well, that's the country we have. And why is it, by the way? Why is it that when a Muslim murderer, a Muslim terrorist, an extremist Muslim terrorist, murders dozens and dozens of people, all the while telling you why he's doing it, telling you who he's doing it for, we have to pretend that that's not true? And yet, when one transgender boy insists that he's actually a girl, we have to take him at his word, no questions asked. Do you see the hypocrisy here? Well, let's talk about guns. My goodness. There are 315 million people in the United States of America, and by conservative estimates, there are at least 360 million guns, more guns than people. There are countless billions in live ammunition in this country. And yet, there are 32,000 gun deaths per year. Far less than the automotive deaths, far less than deaths from drinking and driving in this country, far less from any number of other ways of dying. That's 0.0001% of all American deaths are reported by guns. And this is the thing that's always overlooked here. In fact, if you look at the 2025 worst shootings, mass shootings in America prior to the Orlando shooting, there was fewer than 400 people killed. Take the top 25 gun rampages in America since its history and put all the numbers of the dead together, it's still less than 400 prior to Orlando. Let me tell you one other story that doesn't get enough press from Orlando. There was another immigrant in that nightclub. A man by the name of Imran Yusuf, a Hindu, and a former U.S. Marine who had served admirably in Afghanistan. He was there, without his gun, he was there, and he saved dozens and dozens of lives by keeping his head in the midst of the crisis. He actually forced open a door, and in all the panic managed to guide many, many people out who otherwise might have been killed. He kept his head, ushered terrified, paralyzed with fear people through the doors to safety. How many of our gay and transgendered citizens could this well-trained Marine have saved if he had a weapon with him? The one thing that Obama wants to make sure never happens again. Look, you now have inevitable proof that the federal government is lying to you about the nature, the extent, and even the labeling of Islamic terrorism in this country. You have absolute evidence that they are blocking out, refusing to attribute these violent killings to the people who are responsible for them. You also have evidence that the President of the United States is using this as an illegal attempt to take away guns. Do you now understand why we have a Second Amendment? Do we now understand why our founding fathers were so prescient? You have a government that both cannot and will not protect you on this issue. They won't even tell you the truth. Is that why your founding fathers said, this is why we have to have guns, we have to have the right to bear arms, to protect us from a government that is either incapable of protecting us or willfully unwilling to do it?
This is Right Makes Might with Dr. Duke.